Well, thank you so much for such a warm welcome. Good morning. And as mentioned, my name is Alison De Luise, and I'm a climate change adaptation expert at Climate Alliance, which is a European network of about 2,000 cities that are working to accelerate their climate and energy actions. And it's really wonderful to be here this morning, and I wish to start by very much extending my gratitude to the organisers of this event for trusting me to bring, at this early stage of the conference, some ideas, some context, and perhaps even a few provocations that hopefully then linger in and lend a flavour to your conversations over the next 2 days. I'll do this by presenting some challenges, but also some opportunities for how the services and tools that you all create here in this room can make a greater, or even greater, I should say, impact on the lives of individuals and communities across Europe in both the short term and the long term. And while my comments will very much focus on climate and energy efforts of local authorities, I hope that much of what I have to say today is also relevant for other high priority EU policies, whether they be security, which I see as much on the agenda, competitiveness, ocean protection, or emergency management, topics that I see discussed over the next 2 days. But let me first tell you a little bit about the initiative I represent here today. So Climate Alliance co-leads the longest standing EU Commission initiative on climate change for local governments. It's been around for about 16 years, and we have about 10,000 local authorities all across Europe whose mayors and city councils have committed to achieving the goals of decarbonisation by 2050, to making their communities and cities more resilient to the impacts of climate change, and to addressing energy poverty in their neighbourhoods. And what I want to share with you today is that when we sit with these local officials, the conversations are almost always the same. They want to act, they have political will, they very often have strong community support, but what they don't have, amongst many different things, is good enough data to understand where they're starting from, what's changing, and whether what they're doing is actually working. And that's where I think this community in front of me very much comes in. I personally have a very strong sense that you are sitting on one of the most powerful tools available in Europe in its fight against climate change. And yet, unfortunately, many of the different people who need it most are not quite so aware of this. So I think some of you might be thinking, we're already offering services that do exactly that. We have platforms, we have tools, we've invested millions. Why aren't local authorities using our services? And I personally think that's absolutely the right question we should all be asking as an extended community. Because what we found at the Covenant of Mayors is when we've been asking our community is that it's actually not necessarily a lack of supply that's the main issue. I'm seeing that the problem is often an ongoing and sometimes deep disconnect between the products that you produce and what local authorities can actually use. We have run surveys and workshops with our practitioners, with local governments, officials, those responsible for designing and then implementing and monitoring their climate and energy activities. And we've spoken with them amongst our 10,000 signatories. They are from large cities, from small towns, all across the EU 27 member states. But the feedback has always been quite consistent. The number one barrier they report to us is that they simply don't have sufficient knowledge about what services actually exist or how they might be useful to addressing their needs. And in some cases, they actually say, well, there's actually a lot of services that kind of address this particular issue. We don't know which one of those might be best suited to our context and what we need to do. The second biggest barrier that people report to us, and sometimes in even large cities and towns, but almost universally across small ones, and you would know this very much, they lack the technical capacity to analyse and interpret the data in meaningful ways. And then there's the interfaces. Some are too complex, some are too technical, almost all are too English language, I should say. And yes, cost. I think we all know that obviously these tools need to be sustainable. We need to develop sustainable business models for these services, but sometimes they're just too expensive for some of these local authorities. And so I started this journey into this really fascinating world of Earth observation services just a year and a half ago. So it's all new to me, and I'm finding it quite inspiring. And I can already see that you are building really remarkable things already, and you have a genuine desire to have them put to good use. Yet, unfortunately, we still see a significant proportion of the people who could probably most benefit from them have not yet ever heard of them, couldn't interpret them maybe if they have, and might not be able to afford them yet anyway. So I just want to be really clear, this is absolutely not meant to be a criticism. I'm really saying this in the spirit of goodwill and future collaboration. I actually see this more as an opportunity and a pretty significant one for you all. So I'm going to get a little bit more specific here, and I hope this is where it might become a little bit more interesting for you. So when we've asked local authorities what they could actually use if they were accessible and understandable, the list is pretty concrete and I think very achievable with actually many of the services that you've already created here in this room. So just some examples. They want to monitor the heat loss from rooftops over time, and they want to identify where insulation is failing, where opportunities are for retrofits, where PV panels are or aren't being installed. They want to map heat islands, where they're forming in their cities, which members and neighbourhoods in their communities are most suffering from this extreme heat, where it's getting wetter or drier. They want to estimate carbon sinks, and not just how big these green spaces are, but what they're actually absorbing and what sort of cooling ecosystem services are being provided by them. They want to track air pollution dynamics in near real time. They want to evaluate the solar potential of every single building surface in their jurisdiction. They want to understand the thermal performance of their heat networks. Just a few examples, and I think you'd probably agree that this is not science fiction, and probably most of this is already available today. But the question is whether it's available in a form that a mid-sized Estonian municipality with no GIS expertise can actually pick up and use. And right now, the honest answer is possibly not. Just keep in mind that 40% of European municipalities are of populations under 20,000 people, with a municipal staffing that's proportionate to that number. So again, a few people wearing lots of different hats trying to achieve a lot of things. When we asked our practitioners, our community, whether their teams had GIS remote sensing specialists, the majority said absolutely not. When we did ask them whether they're interested in capacity building around space-based solutions, whether that would be useful, there was a resounding yes, they're really interested. But they also said they wanted us to help them identify and then navigate the many different services that exist and help them understand exactly which ones might be best suited to address the needs they have. And actually, interestingly, many said they'd also really appreciate help in then making the business case so they could go to their bosses and argue for why investing in these services actually would have a really important long-term benefit. So the need is real. The political will, we feel, is real. The gap sometimes just lays in this translation of making what this industry is doing legible, useful, and accessible to the people for delivering impact and change on the ground. So this brings me to the challenge I want to put to you today. And again, I really put this forward in the most constructive spirit possible, acknowledging the many great services that I've already seen you've created and that are being used and are already making a difference. I see that the remote sensing industry has historically been very effective at developing increasingly sophisticated products and delivering them to increasingly sophisticated users. I see that you've iterated, you've innovated, you've pushed the trajectory and the technical frontier, and this matters enormously. But I also see that Europe's climate transition cannot be led only by the technically capable. It must reach the local councillor in a small town in Slovenia, the climate coordinator in a Portuguese coastal municipality trying to address floods, the energy officer in Romania carrying this responsibility alongside many others. These are actually the people who will either deliver or fail to deliver on the European Green Deal at the local level, and they need you to meet them where they're at. And so this means a few things. We see it as meaning designing also for the expert, not as a sort of afterthought, but really as a genuine design priority at the outset. So what does the output look like for someone with no knowledge of spectral analysis? How does a mayor read the heat island data set and convert that into a policy decision? It means meeting the end users where they are, both figuratively and also physically, and it means designing and co-designing these services around real articulated needs. Secondly, it means multilingualism. And this might sound elementary, and also coming from a native English speaker, a little bit strange, but when the platforms and the guidance materials exist predominantly in English, a large share of Europeans' local decision makers are structurally excluded from accessing them. Thirdly, it means reconsidering the cost model as it applies to public authorities, particularly the smaller ones. Again, acknowledging that, of course, your products need to have a sustainable business model for you to be able to continue offering these services. The risk we see at the moment is of a two-tier climate response, in which well-resourced cities with technical capacity are going to pull ahead, while smaller municipalities, which again make up the vast majority of Europe, are going to be left behind. This equity problem should concern the entire sector, not only as a matter of principle, but because a fragmented response weakens the collective outcome. And I know you all wish to do that and have questions, and I've had many of them posed to me about what are the right entry points for doing this. Certainly, we don't want to overwhelm a small municipality with 15 service providers arriving saying, what are your needs? What can we do? And we also realise that you don't necessarily have the time for really bespoke products and that sort of interaction. So we need to really think about what intermediary actors might be available to help you make this connection. So of course, we at the Covenant of Mayors and city networks like the one I represent, Climate Alliance, are maybe obvious entry points. While we don't like to speak on behalf of cities, they can speak themselves for themselves, we certainly understand what their experiences are, their challenges and their needs. So at the Covenant of Mayors, we've started this exploration of Earth observation space-based services just over the past 18 months, trying to work out what might be possible and what role we may be able to play. But we too have limited resources, unfortunately, to dedicate to this. So we are looking for intermediaries like ERSC, which we're here today, brought together by them, but also by other initiatives and players such as the European Space Agency, with whom we've been collaborating, and EUSPA, who also we've been working with. So just a couple of examples. With the European Space Agency, we've had a very productive relationship with their stakeholder engagement facility, which ERSC is part of, also Serco and EventFlow. And they've been helping us start to bring some of the knowledge about these services to our communities. But we've also been helping shape initiatives such as ESSA's Green Urban Transition Accelerator. And this initiative, for example, just recently awarded a contract to Leto Space for the development of an AI-enabled, user-friendly, multilingual platform that acts as a bit of a neutral broker between Earth observation solution providers, so all the services that you provide, and city officials, addressing the challenges faced by small and mid-sized cities, such as fragmented information, limited resources, and language barriers. In another example, we're working really well with EUSPA on trying to connect our cities to some of the pilots they're doing, and we would welcome that more broadly. Another interesting entry point for you, though, may be national or regional organisations within the member states that have mandates to work with regions or cities on climate and energy. So, for example, under the Covenant, we don't directly work with the 10,000 signatories. We work with these intermediaries, sometimes energy agencies, regional agencies, and they are the ones that provide direct technical capacity support to the cities. So a list of all of these coordinators are on the Covenant website, and it could be a great place to start when you're trying to ensure your services respond to the needs and also the shared realities on the ground. And these intermediaries may then be able to take your work and actually integrate these services in the support they provide to the whole lot of municipalities underneath them. And then, of course, we would welcome opportunities for cities to be involved in your pilots. It's a win-win situation. You get direct sort of feedback on the pilot that you're working on, and they get to use this service free of charge. So let me close with this. Europe has made some of the most ambitious climate commitments of any region in the world. But those commitments ultimately live or die at the local level, in decisions made by thousands of mayors and their teams, in the quality of the data available to them, and whether the capabilities embedded in satellite infrastructure actually translate into action on the ground. I see your industry as having a role that goes well beyond providing a technical service. You are part of the infrastructure of the European climate transition, and this is both a responsibility and an extraordinary opportunity, which I think is worth owning as such. The local authorities are there, the political will is there, the ambition, be it imperfect, stretched, under-resourced, is also there. So what remains is for the tools and services you develop to meet the people who need them most, and I'm very confident that the industry will continue to rise to that challenge. Thank you and good luck in the next couple of days.